Well, the winter storm has finally hit us, and I think I'd much prefer snow over all this ice and sleet and stuff we're getting, but I'll take what I can get, because we don't really get too much winter weather down here in the south. But with all this, everything's kind of shut down. Can't really go anywhere or do anything, but that's okay. I don't really like leaving the house anyways. Thankfully, I have this awesome winter beer to get me through it, and I really knocked it out of the park with this one this year. So if you're like me and you like rich, dark, malty beers in the wintertime, when it's cold and frigid and snowing even, I think you should give this one a try. I made two versions of this beer this year, one with oats and one without. The one with oats is just luxuriantly rich and decadent and desserty and densely sweet, but not like syrupy sweet, which I kind of hate. More creamy, like a milk stout or maybe a nitro stout. It's definitely got that kind of nitro creamy foam, even though it's definitely CO2 from the same gas tank as all the rest of my beers. And the one without oats came out much more, I guess, just like a beer. I don't want to say it's thinner, because it's not thin and watery, but it is less dense than the other one, and definitely less creamy and less sweet. And it's grainy, like an ale, and still a little sweet though. Other than that, they're the exact same beer. Same recipe, same ingredients, same order, even the same bag in some cases. They're brewed about a month apart, so, you know, take into account all the variables that go with that. I brewed the one with oats first, and then we got hit with some winter weather pretty early way back in November, which never happens down here in the south. And so I found myself drinking it and sharing it a lot faster than I thought I was going to. So I decided to brew a second batch just to make sure I could get through the winter with it. And on a whim, I decided to go no oats on this one, just as a nice little experiment. But otherwise, they're the same beer, same recipe, same, core flavor profile. They're figgy and raisiny from the Special B, which actually ended up being like the core featured flavor component. And they've got this chocolatey thing going on, which works really well with the figgy raisiny thing. Makes it kind of like a fig pudding. But they're definitely both desserty and sweet, especially this one, although not overwhelmingly so. Because if you know me, you know I don't really like sweet beers typically, or I guess sweet brews of any kind. And these right here, they're right on the cusp. They're both sweet enough to be, malty and delicious in the cold weather without being too much. I think the relatively low ABV helps. It doesn't really drink like a low ABV beer, but it keeps it from being too syrupy. And I think the hop character helps to balance it. I think the hop flavor gets kind of lost behind everything else going on, but it adds this bite that really cuts through the sweetness. But for all the similarities, the differences, while relatively small, are fairly profound. These really are the same exact beer, just two different expressions of that beer. Desserty and beer. Not that either one's necessarily better than the other one, they're just different. And I guess they sort of serve different purposes. I kind of reach for one or the other just depending on my mood, which actually makes it pretty cool that not only did I brew both batches and experience both batches, but I have them available side by side like this. So I'm able to try them side by side and, see the differences, but also on a more personal level, I just like having options. And so throughout this winter, I can grab whichever one I feel like, just depending on my mood, or even switch it up as I go. This one, the desserty one, great as a dessert, but after one or two, I'm kind of done. This one, though, I can drink all night. And as it turns out, this was supposed to be an English beer. I've been wanting to make an English beer for a long time now. I've never actually done it, and in fact, I've never really had an English beer unless you count Newcastle, which I don't think really qualifies as like an English craft or pub ale. And I'm not especially well traveled. I've never been to England. All I really know is the memes. But supposedly when you think of England, you think of cold, rainy weather. Maybe not snow and winter, but we don't usually get all this around here. So I figured this winter would be a good opportunity to try it out. And I don't really necessarily always follow the rules for styles. I'm not brewing commercially or for competition, so I just make the beer I want the way I want it to taste. So I just kind of thought I'd make it a little more wintry. And I started, I guess, with the basis of the recipe being the Apartment Brewer's Dark Mild he put out a few months ago. But I wanted to go darker, and as a hophead, I wanted to go hoppier. So I guess less of a dark mild and more of like a dark bitter, but I don't know if that's actually a thing. And then, as I was scouring the internet for ideas, I came across the suggestion to use Special B. And that's kind of where this recipe went off the rails. I've been wanting to use Special B for a long time. You'll notice that's a bit of a theme with this recipe. Special B is known for flavors of figs and raisins and dried fruit like a sherried scotch. And I love figs. When I was little, we actually had a fig tree out in the yard, and I remember going out and just picking them right off the branch and eating them right there. And my great-grandma, old Granny, she used to make this awesome fig jelly, and she taught my mom how to make it. And so just last year, I planted a fig tree right out here, and I can't wait to do some fun stuff with it. I'm sure some of that will end up right here on the channel. And of course, who doesn't like good scotch? And so that was the point where, even though Special B is a Belgian ingredient, not an English one, I decided to make it the focal point of this recipe and emphasize those fig and raisin and dried fruit flavors. I put the full recipe over on the website with ingredients and amounts and steps and everything, so you can reference it there if you want to follow along. The base malt, of course, has to be Maris Otter. It was originally supposed to be an English beer, so I don't think you can do anything else. And then the Apartment Brewer suggested using Admiral Kilnsmith malt in his Dark Mild, but I couldn't find that. However, he did say that you can substitute it with Red X, which is another ingredient I've been wanting to brew with for a long time. So even though that's a German malt, I went with that. And then, of course, there's Special B, our main focal ingredient. Now with this one, a little goes a long way, and even at 8 to 9% of the malt bill, I went on the high end of what's usually recommended, but it worked out with this beer. You get a lot of that Special B flavor without it being overwhelming. And if you want to see me go all out, maybe do a little bit too much Special B in a recipe, maybe even 100% of the grain bill, let me know in the comments. And to complement the Special B and really add to the flavor, we have just a touch of chocolate malt to give it that chocolatey pudding sort of a vibe. And if you want to make it even more desserty, just add a tiny, tiny amount of oats. You can literally just use store-bought steel-cut oatmeal like the kind you have in your pantry. That's what I did. And since this was originally supposed to be an English ale, before I got started I was just planning on using the SO4 yeast that I already have on hand. And I think that would have worked just fine. But we're not here for fine, we're trying to make something awesome. And when I was doing my research, I discovered Mangrove Jack's M15 Empire Ale Yeast. And yeah, this is an American yeast, so it takes us even further from the original idea of an English beer. Actually, no. I don't know where I saw that, but that's completely wrong. Somewhere out there on the internet, I saw that Mangrove Jack's M15 is just California Common repackaged. But as far as I can tell, it's actually Newcastle's strain. Although, that's not completely clear. Either way, though, it even says on the packaging that it's an English ale yeast, made for English ales. So, sorry about the misinformation. Now let's get back to it. But it gives fig and raisin and chocolatey esters, which vibes with the rest of the recipe we're doing, so of course that's what we're going to use. And then for hops, I cranked it to about 35 IBUs, which ended up being very balanced against this hefty malt bill. I decided to go with Fuggle just because I've never brewed with it, I don't think I've ever even tried it. And again, this is something I've been wanting to brew with for a long time. And I went with a fairly standard hop schedule. A 60-minute bittering hop, which actually ended up being Northern Brewer. You know, that's a good bittering hop that I've used before for my stouts. And then 20-minute and 5-minute late boil flavoring and aroma additions of Fuggle. The recipe as I wrote it out calls for a 1-hour single infusion mash at 155 degrees Fahrenheit. I chose this as opposed to what I usually do, which is a step mash, because the single high temperature step should produce a sweeter, maltier beer. But with both batches, I actually ran the mash overnight, which I basically do every time now to split up the brew day and, just make it more manageable. But of course, 1 hour is just fine and should end up about the same anyways. I use my Anova sous vide to maintain the mash temp, which, by the way, works pretty awesome, and it's a much cheaper alternative to all those all-in-one systems, especially if you're like me and you already have a sous vide for cooking. Go ahead and add all the grain at once. If you're using flaked oats, steel-cut oats, or instant oatmeal, you don't have to do anything special with it. When the mash is done, which for me was when I got up the next morning after feeding Emmy and letting her play, pull the grain and start the sparging process. With a brew in a bag setup like mine, that just means squeezing the bag to get all the wort out of the wet grain. Once you're satisfied you've squeezed it enough, or whatever your sparging process is, crank the heat to get it to a boil. Once it's at a rolling boil, add your 60-minute bittering hop, about 23 IBUs of Northern Brewer. And then, just let it boil for about 40 minutes before adding your 20-minute addition of about 10 IBUs of Fuggle. With 5 minutes left in the boil, add another 2 to 3 IBUs of Fuggle. You can use an online recipe calculator to figure out exact amounts for each hop addition based on your batch size, and I'll have some standard amounts on the recipe over on the website for your convenience. When 60 minutes is up, stop the boil and move on to chilling the wort. This is a malt-forward beer, so really you don't need to worry so much about, locking in the hop flavor. You can do like a no-chill or just chill it slowly and it'll be a little different, but it'll still be fine. With an ice bath though, I was able to get it under the hop isomerization temp of 180 degrees Fahrenheit within just a few minutes. That should theoretically have preserved some of the actual hop flavor rather than converting it to bitterness. Once your wort is at temp, transfer it to your fermenter. I poured it through a strainer to catch the trub and the sediment into one of my PET Oxabar kegs so I could pressure ferment and do a closed transfer. These fermenters are a cheap option for getting into pressure fermentation, but if you can't do that, a plastic bucket or something like the Brew Demon is just fine. And honestly, a big, dark, malty beer like this is probably fairly resistant to oxidation, so it's not as big of a concern. I took a gravity reading with the hydrometer on brew day, and it came out to 1064 with oats and 1060 without, so they ended up pretty close. I pressure fermented both batches similarly at about 3 to 5 psi. I wanted to pressure ferment and, more importantly, do a closed transfer at the end, but I didn't want to suppress too much of that figgy flavor from the Mangrove Jack's yeast, so I kept the pressure fairly low. Both batches foamed up and were pretty active within just a few hours of pitching the yeast, and they went crazy for a couple of days. Fermentation was probably done not long after that, but I went ahead and let it go for a couple of weeks just to be sure before doing a closed transfer to the keg and giving it time to carbonate. I took final gravity readings with the refractometer, which is much easier with keg stuff since bubbles don't affect the reading. The corrected final gravity readings were 1026 for the one with oats and 1020 for the one without. So that makes about 5% and 5.25%. So again, fairly close. And after it was all kegged up and carbonated and ready to go, I ended up filling up a bunch of bottles of each batch from the keg to share with friends and, take on our trip to visit the in-laws at Christmas. And I have finally figured out bottling from kegs, I think. So I'll probably do a video soon showing how I got past all the issues I was having previously. One of the biggest things that solved all my problems was getting a proper bottle filler like this one from Nuka Tap. I've had both versions, both bottled and on tap, for a while now, and I am so happy with how they turned out. The one with oats, it's rich and decadent, everything I said. Sweet and desserty like a fig pudding. The main difference is that creamy texture that just makes it more desserty than the other one. The one without oats, the difference is it lacks that creamy head and instead has your typical bubbly, fizzy sort of texture. And so it's still sweet, still desserty, but it also comes across as more grainy, less dense, less rich and decadent and desserty. It's like a beer. Both of them have that figgy flavor, figgy, raisiny, dried fruit flavor. It's very pronounced. It kind of melds with the chocolate, and they come together to make this amazing chocolatey, fruity dessert. It's less of a sherried scotch, I think. I can maybe kind of see that in there, but it's not full force, that flavor, It's more of, it is a crystal malt. Special B is a crystal malt, so it's got that sort of sweet crystal malt sort of thing going on, but it's definitely leaning into the fruit, flavor. It's a dark beer. It tastes like a dark beer. Definitely an ale. I did that Schwartz beer last year, and that thing was delicious, but that was a lager. It's thin and crisp and all of those things. This is dense and grainy, and it's got that ale texture, which is really good. I think, that's actually better for as cold as it is this winter. I am so proud of this recipe. It turned out so good, and it was perfect for the winter that we've had, with the cold weather that hit early and the ice storm that hit now. And I'm definitely going to have to brew this again. I think it's actually going to go into the standard rotation and probably be a staple for this time of year. And you know what? I think you should too. I think you should brew it, and I think you should try it, because it really is good. Although, I am sad that it's not a proper English beer, because I really wanted to try one of those. So I think maybe for the next one, that might be what I do. I think I might tweak this recipe and make it maybe like a best bidder or something. But if you want to know more, you'll have to check back and keep an eye out for that video. But I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you make this. I really do. And if you do, drop a comment below. Let me know how it turned out. Let me know what you think. But other than that, I'll see you in the next one.